This is Irish Illustrated Insider. It's Monday, February 1st. I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley and Pete Sampson. Not a ton of big news around Notre Dame with signing day coming up this Wednesday. Much more anticlimactic than it used to be. Notre Dame will continue to wait and hear from Logan Diggs with regard to this Wednesday. But other than that, I wouldn't anticipate anybody else signing with Notre Dame. Notre Dame well represented in the Senior Bowl and the Hula Bowl as well. We'll talk a little bit of Notre Dame basketball here at the end. But Logan Diggs, that Notre Dame is waiting on him. It's our understanding that he's actually already signed. So that would be a matter, if he does not want to attend Notre Dame, that would be a matter of him petitioning to get out of the letter of intent. We'll see what happens on Wednesday. Your thoughts on that, guys?
You know, I think if you're Notre Dame, you want to fight to keep him a little bit. But if you get to a point where he's feels like LSU is the place to be, then I'm not sure how much you want to fight that if you're Notre Dame. Like, if you're just going to have a transfer down the road, like bringing somebody in against their will, air quotes here, is probably not a great practice.
Yeah, especially at the age of pseudo free agency, right? If someone wants to leave, it's a lot easier to leave it. If you want to get someone young in to help support your running back room or other rooms, it's a lot easier. It's really weird to start talking about that, but it is going to be the norm. Where let's not say Logan Diggs, let's say somebody that is happy. Let's say Brady Quinn shows up on campus and he's like, I can play better. This team stinks. We're 5-7. I want to leave. That's the way it's going to be, right?
No, it's true. I think that day is right around. In addition to one-time transfer without any repercussions, the day is right around the corner. Where when this day comes, you don't have to petition it. You can just say, "Hey, I made a mistake," or "I want to do something different," or you don't have to go through all the reasons that Eddie Vanderdoes had to go through way back when.
Yeah, and I get the one-time transfer with no repercussions. I mean, it's what coaches do all the time, and I get out from your perspective and football coach's perspective, that's the worst thing in the world. But there's no avoiding that. I mean, it's just
no, there isn't. I mean, as far as
once petitions started happening and getting granted, then it's like, well, why are you not granting him? And then it's just go.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, look, it was that long ago, but I think we all remember Greg Olson, former Notre Dame tight end of 2 weeks, who got to Notre Dame. Other got beat out for the quarterback job by Brady Quinn, who you just mentioned. Like, it was just like, you know what? I'm out of here. And that's fine. Like, it was not good for Notre Dame. Like, he would have helped that offense.
Yeah, that's right.
However, if you want to move on and be somewhere else, then you should be able to move on and be somewhere else.
That would have been an unbroken chain of tight end U instead of Gary Godsey coming into the equation. But that's okay. He did his job.
Notre Dame, as I said, well represented at the Senior Bowl. Ian Book, Robert Hainsey, Dalen Hayes, Liam Eichenberg wasn't there. It's my understanding that he was advised by his agent, who I'm not quite sure who that is, but was advised by his agent not to participate. He's late first round at best, probably early second round, but that was his choice. Aaron Banks was there. Ben Skoranek was there. I didn't hear a whole lot about him.
He had a foot injury.
Okay, and Ade Ogundeji. So, and then Nick Macleod and Sean Crawford. I don't know if there was anybody beyond those two. They were at the Hula Bowl, and Nick Macleod had 2 interceptions yesterday, I believe that game was. But, I think Robert Hainsey, we were talking about this before we started recording. I thought Robert Hainsey looked really, really natural, especially as a pass blocker at center. That's his future on the inside moving forward.
He's such a good football player. You want him on your team, but you just know it's different tackle in the NFL. I mean, his arm length matters. All that stuff matters more than it did in college. So move to center. Robert Hainsey can do it. I mean, Pete Sampson and Tim Priester talked about that in 2017. And then, as we pointed out, by the time it was 2018, maybe just let the starting right tackle stay at right tackle. And that's what they did. Or 2019, I'm sorry. I think I really want to see Hainsey. I'm sure he has committed to moving inside. I think it's great for him.
Okay, it worked out for Zach Martin, so.
Yeah, that's true. He really wanted to play tackle too for a while.
If you're a slightly undersized tackle. I mean, Quentin Nelson wanted to play tackle at some point, but at some point, if you're not 6'6" with arms that are fit for a 7-footer, like moving inside is probably a better idea. So, like, Hainsey always looked like he future interior guy playing tackle, and did a really nice job playing tackle while he was out there.
I think Zach Martin could have played left tackle. I mean, I get it. I don't remember exactly what his arm length was. I think he can play anywhere. He's that good. But
as a 7-time All-Pro, he could just
it might not have been a Hall of Fame tackle.
Right, yeah. He's a Hall of Fame guard. Right. Good move by him.
Right. And Quentin Nelson, he always looked like a guard. And
he did.
He was upset.
Really did.
He was there were some really hurt feelings when they put him at guard initially when he came to Notre Dame. But again, I think that's working out pretty well for him.
Go down as a good tackler, the best guard of all time. It's probably going to work out fine for Quentin Nelson.
3 straight All-Pros, right? So he's off to a good start. Ian Book, I did not see as you said, Tim, I saw a good portion of his practice stuff. He was 5 for 11 in the game for 48 yards and interception. I did not see that. A lot of the reports.
The interception was the game situation equivalent of a Hail Mary. Like you had to throw the ball.
Okay.
Yeah. So other than that, there was a little bit of a beef on Twitter when somebody, a few Notre Dame writers, including Tom Loy, shot back to the guy that said watching Ian Book throw is like an atrocity or something on that throw. It was like it was something where you had to throw. It had to be the Hail Mary attempt per the rules of the game. And it's like you understand that he would not have thrown that ball, right? But anyway, it was when you have someone scouting that doesn't scout. That person tweeted about Ian Book.
His body of work in college will speak for itself. I mean, I think it's good for him that he showed well in drills during the week, and probably show that he's a good study, and things like that. But when you've won 30 games, and started for basically 3 years, ultimately that is what's going to determine his fate and future in the NFL.
I think it's interesting because I think some people were chattering about like, Ian Book's going to really open some eyes this week in Mobile. I'm like, started 35 games at Notre Dame.
Yeah,
like,
that doesn't make sense.
Well, I feel like the book. God, I can't believe that. I made it 5 years ago.
That first week you probably had a book pun. Yeah, let's say.
The scouting report on Ian Book is like long since been established, and nothing that I think happened at Mobile will change it. He looked like he fit in, which is exactly how you would assume that he would.
Right.
He didn't stand out as like the best quarterback there. I don't think there was an expectation of that, but he looked like a legit pro prospect, which is exactly what he is.
I don't know. I heard the way people were disparaging Sam Ehlinger. I thought that, that Book was head and shoulders ahead of him. Some of the things I read. You mean cliches bother you? If I didn't have cliches, I wouldn't have a writing vocabulary.
I want to know if Ian Book and Sam Ehlinger got together and be like, man, your fan base is crazy. Your fan base is crazy.
Good point. Dalen Hayes did some good things, I think, as well. Showed himself in some pass coverage. Again, and Tim, you talk about the medicals. He has shoulder issues, shoulder surgeries dating back from high school. I think it's going to be, in addition to not being a pass rushing defensive end per se, I think it's going to be very difficult for him.
Good all around football player, though.
Yeah,
he'll learn whatever scheme they put him in right away too. Like I think the medicals is even bigger than not being the natural pass rusher, because I think they just find a role for you in packages in the NFL now where. I'm kind of talking over myself when I say, well, Julian Okwara is going to go really high because he's a natural pass rusher. I don't mean Hayes is going to go high. I just mean he gets in the league, and as long as his shoulder holds up, he can play football. He's a good football player. I'm concerned about the 10 plays against Alabama. I mean, we never had a chance to follow up on this because it's not something I even honestly noticed during the game to ask Brian Kelly why Dalen Hayes played 10 plays. But clearly he must have tweaked something, right? It makes no sense. I mean, he played.
But to be playing a go-fu over him the whole time,
right? That makes zero. It's not like they were just looking for a pass rush in Foskey. Yeah, that was a strange thing. So he probably tweaked something, but he went. Obviously, he's okay because he went to the Senior Bowl.
Let's finish this segment before we jump into our questions with Notre Dame basketball. They won 3 out of 4. Their streak against ranked teams continues, however, 0-28. But lo and behold, they started working on. See, there's a cliche. How about that? They start working on defense. I swear to God, I wouldn't be able to write if I didn't have my cliches. They start working on defense after starting out 0-5, and they have been better. They're not going to be a lockdown defense. And Pittsburgh's the best team that they've beaten. That was an 8-4 team. That was an 8-2 team a week ago.
They're solid. I did not think Notre Dame.
I didn't either. Pittsburgh was
compete.
Lousy.
They were terrible. How do you lose 2 games on the road and come home and do that? That's like,
I have no idea.
That's a horrible effort for a team that has some athletes. But Mike Bray said we won 3 out of 4 post game. I was like, what? Even though I knew they won 3 out of 4, it just didn't feel like it, right? And they could win 4 out of 5 because Wake is another lower level team here they can take out.
Wake has been playing better, but yeah, they have them at home tomorrow, and they should, and that would move them up to 4-6 in the conference, which after starting out 0-5. But they're not. They still for years now. I mean, you can say now for years now they haven't. You got to beat somebody that's good. You got to beat and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was that team. Notre Dame shot lights out. They were shooting 65% through the first 30 minutes of the Pittsburgh game, but Pittsburgh just. I mean, you're right, Tim. After losing twice, they just looked like they weren't that interested.
Yeah.
I mean, what's Capel doing that your team would react that way to
that was strange. I mean, they just got lit up. I know Notre Dame was hitting. I mean, I think it was probably set on our message board. Easiest game in the world when the ball goes in. It's like, Notre Dame's good. The ball keeps going.
It was beyond Notre Dame shooting well. It was Pittsburgh's indifference to competing.
But it's better than the alternative for Notre Dame. You mentioned they could be 4-6. They were 0-5, and we had totally buried them. Now they're not alive as a viable NCAA tournament team or a contender to win the NIT if they have that tournament. But look, 0-5 and awful to watch and miserable as of Wednesday to holy cow, they're capable of that is the best case scenario right now for Notre Dame, and they can win another game Tuesday.
It's pretty astonishing though that I mean, it literally took an 0-5 start to really start focusing.
Yeah, and that's the problem with that is they're juniors and seniors and graduate students too. If this was the freshman team that everybody said was going to be good 2 years ago, that started 0-5 against that schedule, it would be different.
And that's all I was expecting, that they would start to live up to their capabilities. And Mike Bray's honest to a fault. He's too honest to a fault. He's too honest for his own good when he's speaking to the media. Because when you start talking about, we're focusing on being in a defensive stance. I mean, what? No.
Pete. That's our Andrew Hendricks.
Yeah.
the down and distance. When Brian Kelly said he's learning down and distance going into his senior year.
If your reserves beat your starters in practice, that's not good.
But when you challenge your starters too.
Yeah, and they lose.
Well, true, although your starters are playing 36 minutes a game. So, I mean, they got to get the rest somewhere. But your point's well taken. There's no doubt that, I mean, how that can happen. And I still really do not, and this is across the board in college basketball. When you have some bodies, what you mean Matt Zona can't play 4 minutes a half? Every time he comes in, he plays well. He can't play 4 minutes a half. Or Tony Sanders Jr., the most athletic player on the team, can't get 2 minutes in the first half and 3 minutes in the second half, or 3 and 2. I just, especially when, I mean, as poorly as Notre Dame had played, at what point do you say what's the difference if we replace Jawan Durham with Matt Zona? Now Durham's playing well now. He's had 4, and he's playing with some confidence and some shooting ability, and he's played better. But the hole's so big now that
I don't want to belabor your point, Tim, but 13 years ago, before I was covering Notre Dame basketball and just going to games, my exact quote was, "You can't put Tyrone Nash in for 4 minutes. You can't put in Tyrone Nash for 4 minutes because Zach Hillisland has to be out there like he's Scottie Pippen or something." I mean, are you kidding? Just they have to develop these guys.
And then not too long after, Ty Nash was playing 34 minutes again.
And even if I didn't know he could do that, he could still have played 4. Yeah. It's a strange thing.
All right. Well, they're on the upswing. We'll see if they can beat Wake Forest. We'll be back segment 2, burning up the boards.
Thank you for listening to the Irish Illustrated Insider Podcast. If you enjoy our coverage of Notre Dame football, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. Go to irishillustrated.com/support. Your support will help Irish Illustrated continue to be the leader in coverage of Notre Dame athletics.
This is segment 2. We call it Burning Up the Boards, and we start with a question from Ron, Mexico 183. Would you push for or pass on Logan Diggs?
I would push until he says that if he doesn't want to be here, then I think you would accept that. But I would keep pushing until you get to that answer. You recruited him. You think he's good enough to play here? He's obviously had a really good high school career in Louisiana. Like, if you're Notre Dame, you see. Hopefully, you can see what you got in South Bend, and then go from there.
Absolutely would not pass. You're collecting talent. You're in the business of collecting talent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it becomes a 5 running back room with plenty of talent in there. I mean, the least talented running back in that room will probably be Sebo Flemister, who's already proven he can play at this level.
That's a good
He's
point.
not a lead. He's not a lead running back for a championship team, but he's a contributing running back for a playoff team and possibly a championship team. So, yeah, I push for guys that can play. And as Priester mentioned in segment 1, nowadays, if somebody doesn't want to come, they're not going to come anyway, right? You're not totally trapped. You get out of it easily if you want to be.
Right. And, the other thing is, like, say 4 months from now, Audric Estime doesn't think that he wants to be at Notre Dame either. So,
or Sebo Flemister, because he's third string.
Exactly. Or Sebo Flemister. Yeah. So the thing about, when I first saw Logan Diggs, I was like, could you please run between the tackles? And that's still important. And he's capable of it. You see him do it, but he likes to kick things outside. But I've mentioned this a couple times. If Tommy Rees is going to emphasize the outside zone, Logan Diggs is tailor-made for outside zone runs. So you push for it, you see if you get them. But, I think we've already been given indications that he doesn't really want to be at Notre Dame. He'd rather go to LSU, I presume. That's where he wants to go. And so the NCAA or whoever makes those decisions will ultimately rule in his favor wherever he wants to go.
Bill Irish, which early entry freshman are you most excited to see this spring other than Tyler Buckner?
Pete?
Lorenzo Styles, for me, is I think the player who could impact the roster the most this year. But I'm all the DBs. I'm just sort of curious where they fit. Do they look like they belong? I think last year's early enrollee DBs, you were like, "Woof, they got a ways to go physically." But so I'm curious if Riley and those guys can hold up a little bit better.
Philip Riley, Ryan Barnes, Justin Walters are the 3 freshman DBs that are early entries.
And they all get to hit the theoretical 2 deep, excuse me, by the end of spring. If they play well, they can pass somebody. That's what it comes down to at those positions.
Right there for them.
I want to see Spindler, but Spindler in August will be more of a all right, let's see what they have here, because he'll need these 5 months, 6 months to be in the Bayless's system.
Yeah, I want to see Styles too, because I agree, Pete. I think that he's a guy that can impact certainly those DBs. Spindler was my number 1 rated player in the class. So, and I've said on a couple of occasions that, maybe he's a true freshman that could push. I want to see Blake Fisher, because I've been the lowest on him probably of most. I see the ability. I see the talent. I want to see him playing against college players, not children on the high school level, where he would literally grab them and throw them down. And the last time I checked, that's holding.
Similar to Spindler, though, where I want to see Spindler compete in August. Let's see Fisher in 5 months after Matt Bayless too, right?
He did. He literally would grab people and throw them to the ground. That's holding, and then fall on them, and that's personal foul.
Unless you Quentin Nelson, then it's just cool all the way around.
Yeah. No, but he's a Devon White, then it's allowed.
Fisher's a real talent, and he needs to be probably in a little better shape, stamina wise. But he's a really talented player. He is probably the guy that I want to see more than anybody in person this spring.
Yeah, I like the Styles idea though too, and I wrote about it in Monday Musings. It's you want to play wide receiver for Brian Kelly early. That early enrollment's important as a true freshman, because it's Stefferson and TJ Jones got in, were good. He had them in mind all summer. They got better in the summer. They got better in August, and they played all freshman year. And that's there. You want to talk about hitting the 2 deep by August if you're good. Wide receiver has that possibility too.
No doubt. And I realize that Devon Allpue and Will Schweitzer probably aren't in a position to get past, several guys at the rush end spot. But I want to, you want to see them. You want to see, when you watch them practice this spring, okay, does that look like a guy that's going to develop into a pass rusher? I like them both. I liked them both on high school film. I thought Schweitzer was a real natural pass rusher, and Alpew has such great length. It'll be interesting to see those two guys. Wreckers 33 hot. How do you reconcile Brian Kelly's comments before the Camping World Bowl and after the Rose Bowl about the need to improve recruiting with Sampson's story that Kelly hasn't spoken to Tyson Ford, one of the top defensive line targets? Should Notre Dame fans expect more of the same from Kelly's recruiting?
No. And after that story ran, you can imagine that got a little pushback on that one. And I was told
he actually did call Tyson Ford?
No, I didn't get pushback in like it's incorrect.
Okay. Well, then the pushback is
pushback in the idea that Brian Kelly is not active in recruiting. That he is texting and calling kids. Nor did the story indicate that he has not, was not doing this with other kids. I think in that instance, Notre Dame felt like they had Tyson Ford pretty much locked up, and didn't feel the need to go down the Brian Kelly route there. But if other coaches ask Brian Kelly to get involved in recruitments, I'm told Brian Kelly is happy to jump in there and mix it up in the early days of recruiting, which I don't know if that was always the truth earlier on. So, is that going to impact recruiting long term? I don't know. I mean, there's a hope that it will around Notre Dame, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see if I guess if you're Notre Dame, the point that you want to be made is that Brian Kelly talking to Tyson Ford or not talking to Tyson Ford doesn't need to be indicative of everything else. That's what they would tell you.
If you have my question on this is just logical question. If you think you have Tyson Ford wrapped up and he's a really good player you want, why wouldn't the head coach call him and wrap it up?
I mean, that's a legitimate that's a legitimate question.
I'm not saying that it has to happen. Maybe other ones don't. It just doesn't make, because that's not in on a guy. That's not early. That's an early pledge, but it's not getting in on someone early in their recruitment. This is, you better lock them up, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that Notre Dame's view is like, we have him, he's locked up, he's going to commit, and then we're going to put him on the phone with BK, because that's like how they used to do it.
Gotcha. Yep.
But I think that's not how they're going to do it a lot moving forward. So I would hope that if you're Notre Dame, like, you look at this and be like, okay, let's avoid this situation moving forward. Let's not have another Tyson Ford story where, like, maybe the next time there's a Tyson Ford story, the Oklahoma or some other team does get over the line with him at the very end.
Yeah, I got a lot of pushback on this because I didn't write about it in Thursday Thoughts, which I thought those were supposed to be my thoughts, not somebody else's thoughts were for
me. Podcast.
Me on the board as well. Like, why aren't you talking about this? I don't know. I didn't talk to Tyson Ford about it. I even mentioned I trust Pete. Pete's not lying, but how am I writing a story about what another site's writer talked to Tyson Ford about? Like, that's it's like why would I?
Right,
I asked Tyson Ford and Tyson Ford's mom about it. So,
well, and how do you criticize the head coach when Notre Dame got a verbal commitment from him? I mean, what are we? And here's my point, that we don't know. We don't know how many phone calls Brian Kelly's made that the Oklahoma coach didn't make to a kid that came to Notre Dame. I mean, it's an isolated incident. It's worth mentioning.
It is worth mentioning. It's just
I get it, but that one isolated incident does not mean, it sounds like this is what Notre Dame said, and I agree with that. It doesn't mean that he doesn't recruit at all or he's a bad recruiter. It was this one situation. It sounded unique and a little bit startling on the surface, but he committed to Notre Dame. So what are we criticizing Brian Kelly for? It's not Brian Kelly fighting Irish. It's Notre Dame fighting Irish, and he's part of the process with assistant coaches. And as long as they get him, that's all that really matters. But I mean, I don't know what to criticize other than, and how many times have we said it in the past, that have there been instances in the past where he could have done more in recruiting? Yeah, but we don't hear about every recruiting story where he goes above and beyond the call of duty to get somebody for Notre Dame.
I mean, we do hear about a lot of them, and you guys have written about them. I know that I've written about them. Like, look, I went to Virginia to sit down with Chris Tyree after Chip Long left, and Chip Long was the primary recruiter on them. And I spent time with Tyree's parents talking to them about the impact Brian Kelly made. I wrote a big story on Michael Mayer when he signed about the impact Brian Kelly made on, that recruitment after, again, Chip Long left, position coach and primary recruiter. So I think the idea that every story that involves Brian Kelly and recruiting is negative is kind of ridiculous. But this was a weird instance where it was a top 100 defensive end that you got that didn't have that relationship, who wanted the relationship. So that's a little bit weird. Also unique. Look, you have a new defensive coordinator who came in and basically pulled that out of the fire.
Yeah.
72 hours before the commitment. That's really interesting to me. So I think there are some people that think every time you do a story about Notre Dame recruiting that involves Brian Kelly, that's a negative thing. It's not. I think that's kind of ridiculous, but I think there are a lot of dynamics of the Tyson Ford story that I find interesting. Brian Kelly is one of them. How Notre Dame uses Brian Kelly moving forward is interesting. How Marcus Freeman impacted is interesting. Why Tyson Ford was so predisposed to love Notre Dame in the first place is interesting. So there's a lot of angles to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm supposed to ask. I'm supposed to ask Brian Kelly about his lack of effort in recruiting compared to the other coaches in the playoffs when he's made the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, and he's just finished 8th in the country or 7th in the country. I mean, there is there's decorum and there is a level of professionalism, and baiting a coach because of somebody else is unhappy with the way the Notre Dame program is going. To me, that's like when people spend Notre Dame's money. People always like to spend Notre Dame's money. Well, people also like to tell us how we should conduct ourselves and handle our careers. And I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Tim JG 987. This is a great question. Who is the best undrafted player of the BK era? Will it be Ian Book?
Well, Book could be drafted.
I think Book will be drafted in the 7th round, just as I said in June when we knew everything.
The first guy that he's going to get a shot either way. So I mean, he's done enough that he deserves a shot, and I think he will get drafted. The first guy that came to mind for me was Matthias Farley, and then I thought about it. Then I thought about it further, and I didn't actually go all the way back to the beginning of BK's tenure at Notre Dame. But then Romeo Okwara's name came to mind.
Right,
that's the one, right?
Yeah, it is.
Romeo Okwara's made $8.3 million playing football.
There you go.
Farley did a heck of a.
Farley's made 4. Also good.
And he started at corner. I mean, Matthias Farley starting the NFL at corner. He was always just the utility safety that was better than Notre Dame fans and some writers credited him for. I didn't think he was a starting NFL corner. That's a heck of an effort by Matthias Farley.
That's astonishing.
It is.
Yeah.
The level of athleticism needed by a cornerback in the NFL, and Matthias Farley's
we knew he was a good football player.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Adams has made a little bit of a dent, but again, the knee issues. And then Barza Mustafa started how many games this past season for a playoff team? Not a real good offensive team, but Chicago
Bears is a rough one. He certainly would have been drafted. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
Because of the injury.
Blown out.
Yeah. DMB 346 over under on Notre Dame's points per game in 2021. DMB 346 sets that over under at 32.5.
Better be over.
Yeah, it needs to be over.
It needs to be, but
wow.
3 or 4 new starting offensive linemen, new quarterback, although you do have a veteran guy. You're breaking in new receivers. They've scored after 4 years without averaging 30 points per game under Brian Kelly. They've averaged at least 30 and usually several points beyond for the last 7 seasons.
32.5 would have ranked 38th last year between Texas A&M and Georgia. So that's, I think, pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it's a good number. I'm not ripping on the
No,
the over under was set really well. I'm just saying it needs to be over. It's such an interesting offense to look at with what they can do, because the offensive line cannot, and people have shot back at this on the message board, cannot be as good as it was last year. That's why people care about the talent.
It cannot be as good as last year.
Who's shooting back at you at this
but
one?
The wide receivers can be better.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The wide receivers can be better. It doesn't matter they don't have any, impressive. If you just have the healthy guys, the wide receivers can be better. The tight ends, I actually came around on this one. Michael Mayer will just be a much better player than he was as a freshman. Now, they cannot be as good as they would have been with Tommy Tremble, but the tight ends can be very good again, or just no drop off, because Mayer can be the first team All-American. So if you look at it that way, clearly having Tremble would help.
I really think Tack is going to take a significant step up this year.
I mean, look at it from the tight ends last year versus the year before.
Right.
You would have said, like, wow, they lose Cole Kmet. No way the tight ends can be as good as they were the year before.
Right.
And they probably weren't as good, but they were still really, really good.
Yeah.
The offensive line is a different question.
It is. So, but that is the crux of the offense for Brian Kelly and scoring.
What if you bring in a starting grad transfer guard?
Yeah, no, they can't be as good as last year's offensive line.
No, I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm 32.5.
I think they're going to go over anyway. I think the approach and the need to go over can happen. Like this would be way over analysts saying that Notre Dame didn't try to go over that. Didn't try to go over their own point total this year, but they were in control of all but 4 games. They do control the game by running the ball, and Ian Book didn't take many shots. I just think there's more shots to be had. There's more points to be scored in all of college football, and I think Notre Dame gets on with that. The key is, can they keep teams off the scoreboard as easily as they have been the last 4 years?
Ty in Cleveland, when talking about the offensive line in 2021, you have mentioned Jarrett Patterson starting at left tackle. Are you confident he can return from his complicated foot injury and start this season? If he can't, who gets the left tackle spot? Let me interject that. I mean, what I've heard is he's ahead of schedule. I don't know how much he's going to do in the spring. Obviously, there'll be no physical work. But he doesn't need no, of course not. But I've heard real positive things about how quickly he is coming around. So I think he will. I mean, at least based upon what I know right now, I think he'll be ready. Certainly, he'll be ready by August to go, barring setbacks.
Let's say he's not.
Let's say he's not.
So does Lugg stay at right tackle and you try out Tosh Baker?
It depends where Tosh Baker is, but
right. Well, it depends. Tosh Baker's going to be wherever Tosh Baker is in the spring without he's going to be plenty in the spring without Patterson. Like they should put Tosh Baker where Patterson will be.
Well, and
does that make sense? Because you have Kristofik. That's true.
Yeah, you have Kristofik too.
It's one of those 2 guys. It's Kristofik or Baker.
And you keep Lugg at right tackle just because he's good at right tackle, and you don't need to move to left tackle. Yeah,
I think that the right tackle, left tackle thing is, I think, a little bit overdone in college.
Well, Lugg's played center and guard, so he could probably pop out to left tackle too.
Yeah.
He'll get them all done. But we do think Patterson. We all think Gibbons to start the season, right?
Yes, start the season.
I mean, I would imagine. That the guard competition this spring, I sure hope we can watch it because it's really. I mean,
we won't be able to. We won't be able to. But I hope so.
I know. I mean, we're dreaming if we think we're going to get more than a couple practices in Notre Dame Stadium, right?
I would think more than one would be
more than one would be
the blue gold game. We'll get that.
The over under non-blue gold game. I would set at 0.5.
I would bet the under.
So there we go. That's not great. All right. Real PGD1. Which upperclassman has the most to gain in the weight room training sessions this offseason?
Oh, boy. Two names pop to mind real easily. One's Braden Lindsay. But, I mean, Lawrence Keys III, I think, needs it even more than Lindsay does. But they both, I mean, those guys should walk into a room this summer or by the start of fall camp, and you should be able to say, wow, that guy physically is noticeably different than he was. And
I
I'm
just
not sure
wonder if
that's-
they're too slightly built for that. Are they just? I guess Lenzy could get rocked. I mean, Lenzy could really look a lot more. He just look a lot more physical, I suppose, than he does. Keys is a small guy.
Anybody can make a difference if you.
That's true. That's true. He could go from smallish to looking athletic wide receiver.
Right.
I'll go Andrew Kristofic because I really feel like the strength stuff is what that's missing. That's been the missing link for him maybe the last couple of years.
I would say Takis. I don't know where he is, but if he's going to take a big step up, that would be very important for him. I think Isaiah Foskey, although he looks good, he certainly looks good in a football uniform. There's no doubt about that.
We all should need a good offseason.
I hear you.
We look like Isaiah Foskey.
I hear you. But, just strength, brute strength, and just being able to play, 50 snaps as opposed to 22 or maybe or less many times. That's a big step up. Anybody else you guys would?
Yeah. And I think of it every time. I wonder why he didn't start all year at Buck, and it's Jack Kaiser. I think Jack Kaiser, the reason he didn't start is he's just not as physically strong as the other Bucks were. Yeah. He is a better football player. He is a better football player than the Bucks that played in front of him. He just was not. I don't think he was physically strong enough.
Tariq Bracy, obviously, absolutely has to. I don't know what you just said about Kaiser, and I think Leofau is going to be a really good college linebacker.
I do too, but Jack Kaiser knows what he's doing out there, and he couldn't get on the field when the two guys in front of him didn't. I mean, it's a strange thing.
Yeah, in fact, we need to talk about that, about who's going to be where, because obviously, I don't think you go away from your 4-2-5 or your rover, but obviously Marcus Freeman likes a 3-3-5, and so. I speculate about this a little bit in the linebacking core, my building block story.
I don't think you're going to have a rover. I don't think you're going to have a rover that plays the same role Owusu Koromoa played, where he's covering in the slot position and stuff like that, one-on-one.
Nobody can do that, though.
It's just like I think it's like James Onawalu era back to.
Kaiser could.
No, Kaiser could not do it.
Well, not like Owusu Koromoa, but
that's the problem with it. We're gonna spend way too much time on that position this fall. Like, why isn't the rover is Freeman's scheme different? They should go back to the rover. It's like, no, you should put Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah back out there. Like, I don't know how
after he's drafted in a first rounder before.
Do the jobs of those linebackers change? Does Freeman want the buck, whatever it's called, to do different things than it did for Clark Lee? I mean, the rover, whatever it's called, is that going to be a different job? I don't know.
I don't either. But a 3-3-5 is going to be in his. I mean, that's a significant part of his package. I think they'll match up. Not that Clark Lee didn't match up, but I think Marcus Freeman is kind of the king of the matchups, or he was at Cincinnati. So it'll be interesting. And then, so think about if we don't get to see any of those practices. I mean, we'll be asking questions, and who will we be asking those questions of? We don't even really know. So if we have to go a second spring without watching the players, that significantly impacts. It certainly impacts our.
Well, it'll impact it a lot more this year. I think last year, other than personnel, like kind of just looking back at our assumptions and stuff last year, it was such a veteran team we knew that was going to come in with offensive linemen and a running game and a quarterback that wasn't going to hit it deep, and they didn't have the wide receivers, and the defensive line was going to be good, and they didn't have any safeties. I mean, we kind of hit that nail on the head. I don't know what the world I would say if I'm trying to, because I wrote a story last year at this time. I made a bunch of assumptions and then a bunch of wild assumptions. It was kind of a fun thing to do. The assumptions were right. Like, I couldn't believe it. I got them right, everything. And the wild assumptions were all wrong. And I feel like this time would be all wild assumptions. Like, there'd be so many more wild assumptions. I don't know if they're going to have a rover. I don't know. When you say 3-3-5, who's the fourth defensive back that can play?
Oh, well, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let alone 5?
Yeah, let alone 5. We're just going to say, we're just going to throw a bunch of freshmen out there now?
I had to do it too deep, and I couldn't give you the too deep at corner. Like, I just had to leave it TBD after it was Tariq Bracy was one of the backups, and like the boundary corner is second team is TBD, backing up Cam Hart, who might as well be TBD.
What? Yeah, that's
I think Lewis could slide over the boundary.
Sure. It's just a strange.
If you want to do that.
I mean, you need to remake Tariq Bracy if you're Marcus Freeman, Mike Mickens. He was benched for the last 2 playoffs. No, 2 years after he was benched for the playoffs.
Well, that's why he has to come back physically a lot stronger. I I still think he can play. I mean,
he's shown it.
You know,
his middle year.
Yeah, I still think he can play. He has to. I mean, you have to coach him up. You right?
Did you hear Pete's depth chart? He has to.
Yeah, nobody else really. I mean, it's like you're looking for probably 2 Clarence Lewis type stories this year.
Yeah,
if you're Notre Dame on defense, just a corner,
unless Henderson are off, or you need Henderson or off for.
Yeah, but I mean, those would be Clarence Lewis type stories based on how little they flashed. If it's Henderson or Offord this year. I mean, those guys are not really any more established than
no
Tucker and Riley and Barnes.
At least they've been in a system. Of course, the system's changing.
Right,
Freeman. So
the good news is, until you guys talked to Clark Lee last summer, let's just go back to last February. None of the three of us said, "Well, Clarence Lewis is obviously going to beat out somebody in a corner and have a good year." So
I wonder
something else will happen. Yeah.
I wonder when they. I mean, they probably didn't know till August, right?
I bet because you don't get to see enough of him, and just he was the non-early enrollee. Think about that. That's crazy. Weird stuff, man. Weird season. All right, Matt Rogers. Speaking of which, what do you make of Quinn Carroll's health and prospects going forward? It will be his 3rd year in the program. Is he just a name among many or a favorite to earn a starting job? And I will point out that none of us said his name when we were running through our starters.
That's true. You know, I remember somebody, I think on a message board saying, having watched Carroll play a little bit this year, saying, wow, the injury has really slowed him down. He looks stiff. No, they thought he was stiff before the injury. I mean, I thought he was a really, really good prospect who I like to tackle, but thought would be better at guard.
Yeah, we all kind of settled on the guard.
Right,
yeah.
And that's clearly where they're looking at him moving forward. But, I mean, he's not a favorite to win a starting job. I wouldn't say that. I don't know that anybody's a favorite outside of Gibbons because of what Gibbons was able to do in a brief span in 2020.
I feel like the guard position, they're going to start 3.5 guards this year. You know, they're going to try some different things I feel like this season, there's going to be a lot of like in-season lineup adjustments. You got younger players, not sure where you got till the lights go on. You're going to try some different things. I think Quinn Carroll is going to be one of those, try some different things. Yeah. And like, I would say, like, it's worth noting your 3rd year in the program after an offensive lineman, that's when you're supposed to make a move.
Yes.
Quinn Carroll's is it appropriately time to make a move now? That's assuming if he didn't have a knee, which he did.
Right. Where Lug was in 2019 is where you expect.
Yeah, like Chris Watt
and Carroll.
Chris Watt didn't do anything for 2 years, was a big time recruit, and then I think as a 3rd year was kind of a part-time player, and then was a great player as a senior and a 5th-year senior. I would expect, Quinn Carroll could have a similar career arc.
Eichenberg's also a good example. He was passed as a redshirt freshman by true freshman Robert Hainsey and stuck behind Mike McGlinchey because they knew he was never going to play. I mean, that's about as much as you can tell someone that you're not involved in the running. When you start spring when it's Eichenberg and Kramer, you start August, it's Hainsey and Kramer, and you're stuck behind Mike McGlinchey on the other side. I mean, and now look at him. He was their best lineman for 2 straight years. Right. So it is a thing where it takes guys a while, and Pete, you made a good point. With a knee injury, he had no hope of overtaking anybody in his class, even for 6-7 months, right? Yeah. And then he lost spring and summer to COVID. I mean, Quinn Carroll had no shot last year. I still don't think he'll ever be a tackle at Notre Dame. Give him all the excuses we're making. Yeah. I think he's a guard. I mean,
guards are great too.
Guards are very important.
Guards block too. Yeah, I mean, I think the free year last year from the NCAA.
Yeah,
Quinn Carroll. That's perfect. Really, really valuable to him moving forward. DIFND, all caps. With scholarship offers made to 3 quarterbacks at the moment, do you expect Notre Dame to offer more quarterbacks this cycle than previous years? Do you think it benefits Notre Dame to offer and seriously pursue more quarterbacks in each class? The 3 that they have offered are Steve Angeli, Gavin Wimsatt, and Ty Simpson fairly recently.
I don't know. I don't
either. I don't know
the answer to this question. I think that, recruiting, we cover recruiting and follow recruiting, and so much of it is like the horse race of like the recruitment part of it. Like, how do I convince you to come to the school where I work? with quarterbacks, I think it's much more about the evaluation and who is in your sort of pecking order, because you only take one position unlike every other spot. And I'm not sure I have a really good read on how Notre Dame views its quarterback board right now.
Yeah, I don't mind pursuing multiple quarterbacks, of course. I think that question was well asked too. Is it realistic that they will continue to pursue multiple quarterbacks? In the age of grad transfers, I don't know about bringing in 4 quarterbacks in 2 years. When one of them should be your starting quarterback for 3 years, right? I mean, as of now, you got to look at Tyler Buckner if you're Notre Dame as our starting quarterback for 3 years. Do you really want 3 other quarterbacks within his 2-year span? I mean, I guess you don't care if someone's going to, hey, maybe the world of grad transfers means, well, we're going to lose Brendan Clark to grad transfer someday if Tyler Buckner's a 3-year starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can even lose Drew Pine to grad transfer, a 5th-year guy with his Notre Dame degree if Tyler Buckner's going to keep starting. So maybe you need to bring in guys to combat that. I was looking at grad transfers, and Notre Dame can bring one in whenever they want one. But in reality, Notre Dame loses quarterbacks to grad transfer every year as well. So I should have probably pointed that out. But I don't get 4 quarterbacks in a Buckner cycle with 2. I don't mind competition at quarterback, though. But boy, they never bring in 2 good. It's been, since 1989 they brought in 2 quarterbacks that were really good at the same time, Tim?
I mean, yeah, right. And I mean, you've pointed out how many times when they brought 2 in a year that they both don't stay at Notre Dame. You can't. I agree with Buckner. I mean, you're looking at him as, I mean, ideally that's your starting quarterback from 2022 to 2024. I like Wimsatt athletically. I think Angeli is really, really coming on and is really a technician. I haven't studied Simpson yet because I don't. Is it Simpson or Sampson? No, it's Simpson.
It's definitely Simpson.
Pete would be well prepared if it was Simpson.
Yeah. No, I knew that. I knew that. I just wanted to say
good.
That. Yeah, no, he's good. And but man, you can't. How often can you bring 2 in a year? How many quarterbacks are willing to? There was a time when, I mean, I remember in the 80s when you had 3 come in a year. I mean, it's a different ball game from a lot of perspectives, and one of them is at quarterback. Bringing 2 in a year, I understand that you have to do that sometimes, but you know that you're not going to bring 2, 4-star quarterbacks in.
Like, so Frazier and Jones came in together, and then they were automatically done because of Clausen. And that just happens. You got to get a Clausen. Like, Notre Dame can't just keep going with, well, let's see which one of these 6 quarterbacks we recruit in 3 years works out. That's why my point with Buckner is it's like having a Clausen. Like, I know he might not work out, but you have to think he's going to work out if you're Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame fan,
and right. And now with the ability to get a grad transfer quarterback now that remember we were saying, wow, will Notre Dame do that? Well, they did it. And once you do it, it becomes
they would do it.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't positive that they would. We thought that they should. I wasn't positive that they would. But now that they've done it once, and especially if it works out in 2021, they will definitely do that again.
AMP 36. For those much wiser than me, what's the knock on Ron Powell III? I see a big dude with good feet, smooth release, can accurately throw across and down the field. Add in the football family pedigree, and I'm struggling to see what the glaring problem is. My guess is he played against low-level competition. What else am I missing?
He doesn't have good feet. I mean, that was part of the statement, and he just flat out doesn't. He is not mobile. He throws a nice ball. I've seen him since he was a young teen in Notre Dame Stadium before a game playing catch with his dad. I mean, he's always throwing the ball well. How accurately, I haven't.
That is so hard to know until you see them against college windows as opposed to high school windows.
That's very true. That's very true.
Brandon Wimbush was an accurate dude in high school. Remember, because
right.
He threw wide open windows to people. It was,
but I mean, Ron Paul's third mobility is not. There was a Kentucky offer. It was my understanding that wasn't a committable offer. He did not have offers to a Power 5 conference school. Maybe everybody's wrong.
Right. Oh, no, yeah. We're not saying it's not set in stone, but it's also people could be right about their evaluations too.
I just think that Notre Dame sees him as a developmental prospect. And, if you get something down the road, okay. But he can help you in practice, scout team, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's sort of how it's seen internally, that he can help your program, which doesn't necessarily mean he's throwing a bunch of touchdown passes on a Saturday.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree, and it's I'm happy for Ron Paulus the second.
Yeah. I mean, we're comparing him to at this point now. If some people are going to rip on Ron Paulus the third, I mean, they probably don't have the right to do that. They don't know enough about football for it. But are you comparing him to Tyler Buckner? Because that's what the comparison is going to be for 4 years, right? He's brought in to be a backup, as Pete said, and you do bring in backups.
Yeah,
I just mentioned 2 guys that can transfer because they want to play someday. If Tyler Buckner wins the job middle of this season or next year, either Drew Pine, who loves Notre Dame, or Brendan Clark, who I assume loves Notre Dame and is injured, is going to leave the school to play football somewhere else. They all do. I feel like we tiptoe around it because we'd have to name them when they're quarterbacks. Quarterbacks leave. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. I was a little surprised. I mean, as hard as he worked at becoming a college quarterback, I was a little surprised that he didn't go elsewhere. But I mean, if you're a Paulus, I get it. He and his dad, I'm sure, expected a Power 5 conference,
Right.
Opportunity, especially since he's been playing since he was a freshman at Penn High School, which is has been the best high school football program in the area for quite some time. They've dropped off a little bit. But he was playing early. He was playing, he got snaps as a freshman. So he won't transfer. I wouldn't. I mean, I would have think if he
we brought that up in one of our podcasts. We brought it up. Oh, it's a volatile. Tyler Buckner could transfer if he doesn't win the job. I mean, but Paulus probably is not going to transfer.
Talking right now, O'Malley.
I know. I try not to say these things to defend people on podcasts, but quarterbacks transfer. Better quarterbacks maybe have transferred than him. Hey, listen. Justin Fields and Joe Burrow transferred, so there's 2 better than Tyler Buckner. Maybe not, but maybe. All right. TDISU 19. How much longer do you think Jack Sorberg will stick around? Is he planning on timing his exit with Brian Kelly's? Any ideas who Notre Dame might target to replace him? And whoever it is, they'll have some big shoes to fill. In my opinion, he could be the best Notre Dame has ever had.
Well, I've personally known every AD since Moose Krause, who was a wonderful guy. It was a different era then, and I mean, trying to compare Moose Krause to Jack Sorberg now, the role of the position it's just night and day. You can't even compare the two. I think Jack Sorberg, and I mean, the many of the things that Dick Rosenthal did for Notre Dame, Gene Corrigan, that was a great hire for Notre Dame, a very experienced guy when he came in. I liked Kevin White a lot. Kevin White, I thought, was a good administrator. I rarely hear that from any Notre Dame fan. Dick Wadsworth was a Notre Dame graduate. First of all, I don't think there's anything to the timing of his exit with Brian Kelly's. I don't think that's in play at all or in consideration at all for Jack Sorberg.
Go
ahead, Pete.
I think Sorberg has been a great AD at the right time for Notre Dame. Exactly who they needed when they hired him. I guess as it pertains to Brian Kelly's replacement, I think Notre Dame would be well served if the next AD picked the next football coach, for the sake of continuity right down the chain, which Brian Kelly and Jack Sorberg have both benefited from. I think it's good if your AD and your head football coach are sort of like in it together, unless Jack Sorberg wants to be in the job for another 15 years, which I'm guessing he does not.
He doesn't. That's a topic that him and I have discussed on a couple of occasions, and he does not. I mean, I'm a little surprised he's still here, to be honest. Well, I'll tell you why, because of the pandemic and his.
He mentioned it on our interview with him.
Right. His feeling, and he had mentioned that to me again privately too. His feeling of responsibility towards Notre Dame, he wouldn't walk out now. Now, if things, when things get back to normal, remember I said a year ago that things would change forever.
You'll see we're in Dublin, Ireland covering the Navy game. Things will be back to normal.
Houston Griffith is blitzing off the edge with his right. He's back.
But so I don't think he would walk out until things were on solid footing with this whole pandemic thing, for one thing. Now, whether he would make the move right then, but it's something that he's given consideration to. It doesn't have anything to do with Brian Kelly. As far as replacements, Bubba Cunningham at North Carolina, I don't know how happy he is there. I'm sure he's very happy there, but he is a Notre Dame graduate and used to be in the athletic department at Notre Dame. Boo Corrigan is the son of Gene Corrigan. He's at NC State. He was at Army first. I would have thought Jim Phillips would have been a candidate who was at Notre Dame, was AD at Northwestern for a long time, but he's now going to be the new commissioner of the ACC. So I don't think that he's going to
unavailable.
To dip back to Notre Dame. I think Bubba Cunningham would be great.
Can Bubba Cunningham go get the trophy that they took back from Notre Dame Stadium at Tulsa after that game? You remember that awkward post-game presentation?
I've talked to Bubba Cunningham a handful of times over the last few years, and that's never really come up.
Come on! That is number one. They brought a trophy to give to Notre Dame after Notre Dame was going to beat them for Tulsa's first trip to the stadium, and Tulsa won. There's got to be a 30 for 30 short on that at least. That's
amazing. Don't I know anything about that or remember that?
Because they had to slide the trophy out of the room. It was just like, thanks for having us at the stadium. We won. Goodbye. We'll take this with us now.
Tulsa should take it home and display it prominently.
Dad of the 90s, on a related note, who leaves first, Bray or Kelly?
Definitely Bray.
Bray.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's an issue. And we will end with this question from Siggles. And I like this question. Since tomorrow is Groundhog Day, in the spirit of the Bill Murray Classic, what's one aspect of last season's team you don't want to repeat and one aspect you hope is repeated? There's so many things to
I discussed them both on this podcast. I don't want to repeat the lack of downfield explosion from the wide receiver unit. I do want a repeat of an offensive line dominant force that is the reason Notre Dame wins games. Because I always want that to repeat forever for any team I follow, cover, or root for. You win every game.
I don't want to repeat spending Thanksgiving weekend in North Carolina.
You won't.
But I do want to repeat covering the college football playoff.
I don't want a repeat of Jonathan Dorr making 4 of his last 9 field goal attempts. That's when you can't count, when you have no idea what you're going to get from your kicker.
You're right. No, that was rough.
That was rough. That was just one that popped in my head. But I'm with you on this, O'Malley, that Notre Dame was 7th in the country on third down. Think about how many times we complained about 3rd and short and they couldn't convert.
For years.
They always converted on 3rd and 4th and short. If they didn't convert on 3rd down or 4th down. That's a great stat to have. Again, probably won't be able to do that because of you don't have the offensive line that you had last year. But man, that's a great thing to have. I know it's not explosives, and I agree with you on that one, Tim. It's not.
Gotta have them both. Gotta have them both these days.
Yeah, you can't have them both. But man, it's great to be able to convert on short yardage. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up with that. We'll be back next Monday. Thanks for joining us. This is Irish Illustrated Insider.